It's a fake cold. The whole thing is a fake cold, right?
That's true. The Troy City Council Special Study Session for March 18th, 2019. I will call that meeting to order. And the roll call, Ms. Stewart.
Mayor Slater.
Here.
Councilmember Abraham.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Baker.
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Here.
Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick. Councilmember Pennington.
Here.
We were notified that Councilwoman Hoderick wouldn't be here for the study session or the City Council meeting this evening, so we will deal with her absence at the City Council meeting this evening. We have one discussion item this evening. C1 is a community survey with topics and then a survey design and a preparation with EPIC MRA. So having said that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to City Manager Mark Miller, who will make an introduction and continue our discussion. Good evening, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor, honorable members of council. As the mayor mentioned, we the city did enter into a contract with EPIC MRA for both resident survey and a business survey. So we, along with Cindy Stewart, had sent John Kavanaugh some background information so that he would be able to prepare for this meeting, and we helped. And so the topics that we suggested are included in your packet, and Mr. Kavanaugh will work with you to answer any questions about the survey process. He is a wealth of knowledge, and also to prioritize what questions or what topics you want to gain insight from our residents and businesses from. And with that, I will turn it over to John.
Thank you. Good evening, John.
Good evening, and thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here and anxious to get the ball rolling. We've started some progress already with the wealth of background material that staff has provided. And I wanted to say, give compliments to whoever's responsible to for the website. It is, once you figure out how much information is available, it is a wealth of information, and I used it quite heavily in developing ideas for a questionnaire. I initially was sent a list of topic items that I understand was solicited from members of the council. And by way of background, we do a lot of our work involves questioning residents of school districts about whether or not they would favor a millage or a bond. And by way of example, do you support education? Why, yes, I do. Do you support it to the tune of $250 extra per year? Well, not so much. Tell me a little bit more about what you plan on spending that for. And so over the years, over the past 30 years, we've developed a method of exploring those items. And, there is, for instance, for the aquatic center or telecommunications facilities or green space, each one of those could delve quite deeply, based on the information I gleaned from the website, into its own 12 to 15 minute interview, depending on the topic. However, with these half a dozen or so topics, it's my understanding there's a sense of, all right, where in a list of priorities does this topic fall among residents? And we've also developed over the years, working with municipalities and county governments, a way to try to assist legislative bodies such as your own in determining what is and is not the top of the list and the bottom of the list. It's easy to throw out a number of different topics and people will believe, well, sure, that's important. What's more difficult is to try to get an order of priority, because obviously, limited resources, you have to make priorities and have to make hard decisions. So typically what we do is start out with our questionnaire for, in this case, a municipality, about general atmosphere, how satisfied residents are with the status quo, based on what you get in return for services. Do you think your taxes are too high, too low? Are they about right? And then a list of items where, here's a list of items that most municipal governments and governmental entities provide citizens. For each one that I read, could you tell me whether you think the city of Troy ought to be doing more? Are they doing too much? Or is there enough of? And then there's a litany of maybe a dozen items or so. That helps give a priority of what is foremost on residents' minds overall. As we delve more deeply into some of the specific topics, as for instance, I happened to watch the study session on telecommunication towers, and it is a challenge for people in my line of work to try to encapsulate that in 2 or 3 questions. It's a fairly complex issue, and there are fish hooks to be for a respondent. Before you get a decent answer out of the electorate, out of your residents, you have to apprise them of potential landmines in answering yes or no, or I support or I disapprove, or whichever. What I took out of that study session is to try to develop questions that note, number one, your limited authority in the smaller relay stations. That is by virtue of recently enacted legislation. The overall reality that broadband width, and I've got to figure out a way to describe that is understandable to folks, but wireless service demand is increasing and capacity to deliver it needs to increase accordingly. And here is what our legislative body in the city of Troy is faced with. Based on this information, where do you want to go? And to do that in a manner that is unbiased. We're currently working with another township on the western end of the state, and there are 2 very ardent camps on the issue involved, and they are both urging me to write questions in a certain way. We didn't hang around for the past 30 years by doing that, and won't do so. I try to gather as much factual information as possible, and that's what I try to deliver to a respondent on a telephone interview. In the instance of green space, I was able to find several articles wherein the subcommittee that was charged with looking at it had recommended council a 0.05 mil increase for the following purposes. And typically that lines up nicely with the school districts or any other, with the county government or even a transportation authority, with presenting that statement as a cold statement. Based on that knowledge, would you vote yes or no on that issue? And give a context into which the respondent can make an informed response over the phone. I have to be mindful as well that this person is hearing it, not reading it. And therefore try to limit the amount of detail of .05s that get put into a statement that someone is listening to. And so what we typically do, and I noticed in the news article that I read, that, all right, if the average taxable, on an average taxable value of $150,000, and I usually throw that out there because of the ease of arithmetic, it would cost a homeowner in Troy an additional X amount. Based on this information or whatever else you might know, would you vote yes or no?
That doesn't skew it or anything when you provide that context?
No, because I want to get away from, do you support parks?
Right,
Do you support green space?
Right.
I like to apprise them of, if you say yes to that, here are the consequences of that yes. And then further on, maybe just among those who are undecided or who said no, here are some of the things that those funds would be dedicated for. After hearing a little bit more about it, let me ask you again, would you vote yes or no? Similarly, we can set questions up like that on the Aquatic Center, even though there is no, I could not find any firm dollar amounts as to repair and renovation. I did find where it was a $22 million project back in the 90s, so that sort of information could be put to the respondent. And then here are several alternatives that had been suggested after years of much use by residents and non-residents alike. Like any other facility, it is in need of repair and restoration. Which of the following would be your option? Close it, renovate it, et cetera, without any, absent any firm dollar amounts. That's the best I can craft in terms of talking about that particular issue. In terms of the town center, my initial notion was that was going to take the lion's share of the questionnaire, and so I devoted a great deal of initial time and effort, and there is plenty to look at on the website, a couple of town hall meetings that were an hour or so long, and others. But again, what would be done is discussion has been had about the 125 acre parcel of city-owned land at the corner of Big Beaver and I-75, and then lay out some possibilities. Do you support or oppose that? Based on what I viewed and the materials that are available on the web, that could be a survey unto itself. I mean, there is plenty of stuff to say, all right, I know you, irrespective of how you told me you think about the overall concept, I'd like to present to you some of the components of that concept. And again, irrespective of what you told me, do you support or oppose that particular component? And then lay them out. If support or oppose, would that be very much or just somewhat? And in that way, you can get a level of intensity of belief on things as well. And that sort of gradations of intensity of sentiment are typically used in most of the questions that we pose. One instance is, do you think your taxes are too high or too low? If anyone says too high, we would follow up with, would that be much or somewhat? We have 30 years of survey research that lets us know what is and is not out of the norm. You will, in any community, always find at least 18 to 22% who will automatically say that their taxes are too high. It's when you get in ranging up into the 35, 40, 47% range with a high level of intensity that any request for a millage becomes a tough road to hoe. And that's why we ask these general atmosphere questions. Based on what you've observed, do you think the buildings, grounds, and facilities owned by the city of Troy would you give them a positive rating of excellent or pretty good, or just a negative rating of just fair or poor? Putting all those things together, the more enough to much battery of services provided. Should Troy provide more? Are there enough? Are there too much? You get a notion of what are priorities among residents, and then fit that into the general atmospheric questions of whether or not they think they're already thinking their taxes are too high, or that they recognize that some of the facilities are not up to snuff, or they are. In that particular question, it might be useful because these are asked at the outset of the interview. And again, respondents don't have an opportunity to read ahead, so that you bias the question at the beginning by them knowing that there will be a follow-up on facilities and green space and aquatic center, et cetera. But if someone issued a negative rating for city facilities, you might follow up with an open-ended question. Can you identify which one or two facilities made you get that response, prompted that response? I like to avoid too many open-ended questions. It's a survey, not a focus group. So the methodology and the instrument that is used doesn't lend itself to a great deal of in-depth drilling down. Moreover, in a 400 sample survey, we might be able to create 10 categories of responses. But that becomes a subjective thing on our part because you've got 400 different responses and we categorize them. We can certainly turn over verbatim answers on open-ended questions, and reasonable minds can differ on how to categorize things, but typically there isn't a great deal to get gleaned out of open-ended responses, particularly an open-ended response as to why positive or why yes. In school millage, in that sort of scenario, the bulk of the answers are pro-education for the kids. It doesn't give a great deal of guidance to the legislative body involved.
Pretty general.
Yes. In the negative responses, you will typically see wasteful spending, taxes already too high, asking for too much. Those will typically group together to be about the same proportion of responses as those who responded, I believe my taxes are too high, that was asked. And so again, the idea here is to give some guidance to the legislative body and attempting to drill down on reasons why for things. This methodology isn't particularly a good tool to use. Again, focus groups can, and they are often used at the outset or at the end of a survey. My preference, if they're going to be used at all, would be afterwards, because the survey itself will include a comprehensive demographic battery by age, income, race and ethnicity, gender, education level. Each and every one of those questions can be pulled apart by that. Do women think differently than men on this issue? Do parents of school-aged children think differently about the aquatic center or green space or communication towers? I did notice in the study session interest in knowing if it would be possible to pull apart responses of those individuals who were adjacent to parks. In the case of the larger macro towers. Kind of is the answer. What is really nice about the city of Troy is there are 4 zip codes and it splits the community nicely into quadrants that are more or less equal populous. So if in the instance of a 500 sample survey, the example given in the study session for cell towers was Bowling Park. That lies in the 48084 zip code. And responses from that zip code could be isolated. In a 500 sample survey, that would be 80 interviews out of 500 samples based on population. You don't want to get too much smaller than 80 interviews if you're going to make any conclusive determinations based on subset analysis. Again, gender, school age, parents of school age children tend to be somewhere around 30 to 35% of the population in jurisdictions. All of those things, and that's what the report ends up giving. The deliverables after the completion of the survey are the questionnaire with the answers filled in with percentages. Yes, no, undecided. Along with what is known as a cross-tabulation report. Every one of those questions will be dissected by zip code, age, cohorts, gender, etc. So it is our job then to take a look at the cross-tabulation report and to identify those subsets that differ from the norm by substantial amounts and bring them to the reader's attention. Whether that is, I leave it to the legislative body or those who commissioned the survey to tell me whether or to tell themselves whether that's meaningful or not in terms of policy direction. But it's my job to identify where they vary from the norm. And that would be part of not only the cross-tabulation report, but a narrative report that would be delivered that would highlight it for you rather than pouring through what are literally 400 pages of cross-tabulations. With that, the same type of exercise would be used in the case of businesses. I would strongly urge, however, we have done business surveys for Crane Detroit Business, and once you wander a little bit further than 8 to 10 minutes, number one, business managers and owners are busy individuals, and as one myself, I am not particularly receptive to cold call solicitations to participate in a survey, even though that's my line of work. So they are difficult to administer. That being said, they are even more difficult if you tie up someone's time for longer than 10 minutes. So while it can be done, it becomes a very protracted exercise that can be mitigated somewhat with announcements from the local Chamber of Commerce and others who say, if you have the time, please cooperate with it. It is a legitimate exercise by the city of Troy trying to get your opinions. And that goes a long way in helping, as does the caller ID that lists our name. We've been fortunate enough to have business with Channel 7 and the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press since the 90s. In every election cycle, they will commission our firm to do statewide surveys on election matchups and so forth. So we've had some exposure. So seeing our company's name show up on the caller ID isn't an automatic turn-on. I am more than happy, and in fact, it would probably be more fruitful if there were questions that I might answer.
Absolutely. Councilwoman Huron.
I think you touched on this a little bit with if the survey not a focus group, but is there any sort of like conjoint analysis that can be done so that you can see residents' preference for allocation of funds? So in other words, you know, there are things that we're looking at like improving the buildings here to address structural issues. We're looking at funding transportation like Medigo and the Troy Trolley, et cetera, et cetera. Is there any way you can get like a willingness to allocate funds or a sense of that?
The way it's constructed and without zeroing in on a particular topic, that'd be kind of difficult. Again, attitudes toward whether or not a belief in higher taxes that is outside the norm, comparing that with the more enough too much, is Troy doing enough or not enough?
And this is more within what's already being collected as taxes. So in other words, the use of our operating fund or capital fund or general fund.
Without posing a question that directly asks, would you be willing to spend more?
Okay. It doesn't really get them anything.
Again, the only one I saw out of these was the Green Space Subcommittee that made it a hard and fast specific recommendation for an amount.
And then just a follow-up, if I may, one of the things that we have coming up for renewal relatively soon is the library millage, and there's a lot of discussion about would we put it on the ballot at the same rate that it is today? Is that something that could be done
Yes,
as well?
and that's something I omitted. That was part of what I looked into, and would look to folks here to supply me with the figures. You know, it's always helpful to apprise a respondent of what the existing rate is, what was originally voted, if that's been rolled back by virtue of the operation of the Headley Amendment, what it generates in total funds, and what's being requested, or might be requested. If it were a how I'd set that up is I'd ask for the first of the questions would be the higher of the two asks, requests. Some people have proposed that the Troy Public Library needs whatever. And have suggested that an increase of .XX mils over its existing rate would be needed to achieve whatever I just said. Based on this, would you vote yes or no? Among no and undecided, or perhaps all, but particularly among no and undecided in that question, it might be a follow-up that a backup plan has been proposed that would scale back the prospects for the library and give a brief description of that, costing the average homeowner X. Based on this, would you vote yes or no? And then you can combine the yes from the initial question with those who moved to yes on the scaled back to give you an idea, and then pull apart both of those by demographic subgroup, and on question by question analysis of, all right, do those who say more ought to be done in this area, are they more likely to say yes on the first or the second?
Okay.
And that's the type of analysis that we do.
Mayor Pro Tem Baker.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Kavanaugh.
Sure.
Good stuff, and thanks for getting here right now. To follow on the library a little bit, originally, I think we can talk about specifics here. I mean, the idea was, for me, one of the ideas was, you know, do people want to pay more to have it open on Fridays? Do people, I mean, and you know, my original proposal was to pay more from the existing funds that we have and keep the renewal. I mean, I don't know how this can all be played out. That I think is important. I don't know, you said you're looking for figures from people. You'll be getting those figures from staff as to how to implement that. Mark, will those be, do you know what those will be? I mean, how that'll be broken down?
Not.
I mean, not specifics, but I mean, that's,
We can get to the numbers if that's what you're asking.
I guess my concern is, and Kathy, I love the library, you know that, and I love, and you know, all that, but a lot of this sounds like we're only looking for millage increases in the city of Troy, and the survey to me was not just about how can we get more money to do these things. It was supposed to be some other topics, and the town center was how I think a lot of this started. And so I guess I'm a little concerned about putting out a survey that talks about, would you pay this much more money? Would you pay this much more money? It might not give us the results we want, or it almost seems too biased to be talking about millage increases for everything, even though it's not for everything. I'm generalizing. So I'm just trying to, and you're the expert, obviously, and wouldn't let that happen, but I just want to make sure that we're not only focused on, I don't want someone to get this survey and think, oh, well, the city's clearly trying to raise our taxes and they want more money for the library, now they want a green space tax increase, and what about, that leads to the conversations too, well, there's X amount of dollars sitting here, what about all that? So I guess it kind of follows what you were asking.
why I was asking about
of
the
how do you,
conjoint.
because a lot of it is allocation of fund balance money that we have for certain things, for facilities issues and our budget and budget priorities and what we're doing and not doing. So is it possible to get, I don't want the community to think that we're only looking to just raise taxes because we
Right.
obviously have had a strong economy and there's money coming in and people know that. We can always use more and you can always do more things with more money, but I don't want that to be just the only focus and, it's not up to just me, I get that, but I guess I need to have that said. So I think you kind of answered a little bit with the Councilwoman,
Edna.
I almost said Edna too. Abraham's comments and questions, but to me, that was my concern when I saw someone hearing this, and I guess I'm just cautious of that. and hesitant.
The bulk of the questionnaire would not be, would you vote yes or no on this particular millage? If there are two, and it sounds as if there might be two to test, green space, and I only formulated that because there was a recent news article that actually cited the .05 figure, as well as a notion that the library was either up for renewal soon or there was interest in expanding hours. Now, whether or not that would require a millage is, I'm open to being educated about that. In any event, you're absolutely right. You wouldn't want a litany of types of, well, how about this? Well, how about this then? Would you reach into your pocket for this? As it sounds, there might be two maximum questions that would cite specific millage request amounts that the respondent would be apprised of what it would cost. And those would be rotated and would come toward the end of the interview. The bulk of the interview, and again, people aren't reading this, they're hearing it, would start out with atmospherics. What do you think about Troy? And then here are some services that are provided. Should you do more? Is enough being done? Is too much being done in this area? And then some of the items like the telecommunications and town center concept would precede any questions that would be directly asking a respondent, if the election were held today, would you vote yes or no? And your answer about reallocation of general funds might be found in the level of support for an increased millage.
Very true. Councilman Pennington.
Thanks for coming.
Sure.
Just so we get, a broader survey, responding, is it just a phone interview, or are we doing mail-outs also?
Right now, it is live operator telephone interview.
Okay.
A representative sampling of the population.
And you mentioned 80 a couple times.
Oh, 80 interviews would come out of out of a 500 sample survey.
Okay.
Citywide survey. 80 would come out of the zip code 48084, which is the southwest quadrant of the city.
I understand where you're getting that from. Thank you. All right.
And likewise, roughly half would be female. Fewer than half would be females over 50. Citywide, I'm anticipating to find somewhere around 30% of respondents would be parents of school-aged children. Once you start getting a little bit lower than 50 interviews, analysis of those subsets becomes a little bit suspect because your margin of error shoots way up unless they are so heavily supportive or opposed to something that you can read something into that.
Mm-hmm. Just a follow-up to that is, when you call businesses, how do you know that you're getting through to the decision maker? Because I know when somebody calls me, and I've been around for 50, we've had our business in Troy for 50 years. When they call me and they tell me they want to do a survey, I ask them how long it's going to take, and then if I have time, I set my timer. I mean, if they say it's gonna be 10 minutes, I set my timer, it's okay, you know, we're almost done here, right? So, I mean,
The intro script has the interviewer ask for the appropriate person. May I speak to the manager or the owner of the business. I'm from Epic MRA. We're calling on behalf of, on a survey of Troy-based businesses. May I speak to the owner or the business manager? If you say, that's me, and say, thanks, the survey will take, and then we give an accurate rendition of how many minutes it will take.
right, there, you get so many hangups at that point.
In businesses, that's more important. With residents, you'd be surprised how quickly the time goes if the topics being covered are of local interest and jump around a little bit.
Sure.
You know, we conducted some surveys that were really tough to complete because it was 20 minutes on redistricting.
Right. Thank you.
Councilman Henderson.
So I remember when we first started talking about a survey, it was really all about the transit center for the most part. And you know, we wanted, or the transit, wow, that's. That was one of the topics at Schroeder Elementary School. That's why it's in my head, but about the town center. So, you know what, the three things that I thought that we were gonna try to drill down on were, you know, what was acceptable by the people, not necessarily, you know, should we develop it, but should we leave it alone? Should we make it a central park, or should we develop it? And I don't see that necessarily addressed in here. So can we add?
Any direction you want me to go in the questionnaire, I'm happy to accommodate. Again, I had initially thought, and I had set up in my mind, well, a good 10 minutes of the interview was on the town side.
So we could certainly add some form of trying to figure out what the people want in that situation.
Sure, if it's the notion that there are three options to choose: the status quo,
Right.
development, or
Central Park.
a central park, that certainly can be added.
Right. That's just my idea. I don't know if anybody else is in favor of that, but now let's go to the Troy Library. You know, we only spell out, you know, would they support a millage, but the topic has come up many times at this table about whether or not to support a 6 or 7 day library. I think that's kind of a critical piece too. I don't, I think that should be at least in the conversation. The telecommunications piece is a new piece. Is that even a necessity? But, you know, I don't know, did we have consensus that we wanted to put poles in our parks is the question. I mean, should we even waste time on that topic? Is a question I would have. You know, if we've got other topics that are more concerning, maybe that can be an elimination. And then to the 500 respondents, if it's all phone, you know, I get that, but are there ways to get economically more people involved by use of SurveyMonkey or any one of those number of things, or would that exponentially increase the costs?
Not exponentially. Typically in smaller communities, we do recommend this. Because in smaller communities, I can't have as robust a sample size as 500 or 600. So a sampling of 200, 250 is often viewed askance by the residents who happen to be on the other side of whatever the data reveals. We will, in those instances, recommend or offer at least broadcasting to all unique residential addresses a postcard that explains the city of Troy is conducting a survey, and here's how you participate. Please note the control number on the upper right-hand corner of the postcard. It will be needed in order for one member of your household to conduct to participate. The reason for that is you want some level of integrity that the data you're collecting isn't all from one person or community group or whoever happens to be on one side of the issue or the other and is better at organizing their supporters. That's why we uniformly recommend live operator telephone interviews. I control the stratification of who gets called. I know how many interviews come out of the 4 zip codes based on population. I know what the age cohorts of the city as a whole are and what they ought to look like. So what you end up doing in a wide broadcast is eliminating the ability to pre-stratify, to get a representative sample of the population that isn't insurmountable. You can conduct post-survey weighting whereby, all right, age 65 and older is underrepresented because it required the use of a computer. I can add a weight to those answers that did come from 65 plus, but you run the risk of manufacturing data that way. So our preference is, for decision-making purposes, is to rely on the live operator telephone interview that is sort of a balance between the wider participation potential for an online survey, but minimizes the drawbacks that are associated with it. I'm afraid in a city of this size, you might end up with a response rate that isn't that huge to begin with. Although I might be dead wrong on that. There are those who regularly watch the city council meetings and regularly attend city council meetings. They and their ilk are most apt to participate in an online survey. It's a phenomenon we tell school superintendents all the time is don't make judgments based on the what you heard at the last board meeting. Why don't we take a survey of the population at large and find out?
So boiled down, 1,000 would be a better sampling, but if it's 1,000 of computer where people are directed, hey, go do this.
Right.
Might not be a good.
And another problem with that is it tends to remain open. If you want to encourage participation, you'll leave that open for about a month with a follow-up reminder postcard. And then that, as I noted, that control number that allows them, it really doesn't prevent anybody from doing it. There are ways to prevent duplicate submissions from the same IP address, but then whoever is the first one to the local library to use the computer is the only one who gets to log on. So what we do is create that control number becomes part of the data, and then we'll eliminate duplicates.
Councilman Hamilton, did you have a?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So, covered so much of the questions I wrote. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I just want to say I tend to agree with the council member Henderson here on the telecommunications facility. I maybe like a very brief question on that, but I definitely think it's not the priorities of the other things. Another thing I wanted to mention with the library is many residents have indicated to me they are interested in spinning the library off into its own, I guess you call it a district library or its own separate library with its own board. So I don't know how you would ask about that, but I think that's an option a lot of people have showed interest in, and a lot of other communities do that. So I want to make sure that's covered. So you say there's 400 to 500 sample. You do a mix of cell and landlines, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. That's good. So the 400 to 500, that'll be residents, and then how many responses for businesses, or is 400 to 500 residents and businesses?
No, the resident survey and the business survey are separate animals.
Yep.
And
There'll be different questions too. Okay.
yeah, but there'll be some common ones.
Right, right.
At least based on what I've received so far in terms of issue areas to be covered. What was proposed to the city was anywhere between a 400 and 600 sample survey of residents. And really what drives the price on a survey are two main variables, and that's interview length and sample size. My guess is this is going to be on the longer end of an interview length. So the only other place that gives is sample size, but I wouldn't want to do under 400.
Right.
Only because it's not that 300 samples is that much better in terms of overall margin of error, but when you start pulling it apart by demographic subset, your number of raw interviews starts to get a little weak. That being said, and again, 600 samples is not that much lower a overall margin of error than 1,000. I think it's somewhere around 0.8% margin of error difference. The real value in a higher sample size is, as I said, the ability to pull apart segments and have greater confidence in what that result is in terms of a margin of error.
Okay, I had a couple more. So I know you asked like general questions like how are you satisfied with the city? Do you ask questions like whenever I see polls online of the president or the governor, you see like approval of the governor, approval of Congress. Can you
I'm
ask?
more than happy to line all your names up. And say,
No, not individual. I mean, not like that. I'm just saying as a whole, like the city government.
Yeah,
or,
I can.
Is that a normal thing that's done? If not,
It's not abnormal.
okay.
I can tell you exactly what it's going to be.
Yeah, don't they do that every 2 years
It's
anyway?
going to be very low.
Do we want to?
Well,
No.
It's going to be very low.
Okay. I don't know. This is what I see in other.
Probably
places.
somewhere around 10%.
We probably get half and half out of school districts as to give a favorable or ABCD grade rating to the superintendent, to the board, to the staff, to the teachers. And teachers and principals are always on top, and the board members and the superintendent are always lower.
Okay, it's not like something I need, but I'm just curious about that.
Yeah.
But another good thing Councilmember Henderson mentioned was in the town center questions. We need to be very careful with how we word that, because if we just say, do you want it to be a central park, people will be like, oh, that's great, but we have to somehow tell people, yeah, right there's a cost to that. If you do development, then that brings in revenue, but I don't know how you say that to not skew it. So I just want to be and that to me is very, very important to really that we correctly get the sentiment of Troy after the charter amendment vote we had 2 years ago, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but there was a charter amendment that was kind of inspired by the town center project, and I kind of want to understand more of where people were, not with that vote, but
Did it fail?
it failed, but
Okay.
about 40-something% of people approved of it. So I really want to nail down what people's thoughts are on the town center and give them a very fair, good question that encapsulates the issue.
Well, what I'll be after then is what are the implications of doing nothing, if any? What are the costs associated with converting to a central park, if any? And what are the ramifications of, based on my viewing of the town hall meetings on the town center, the people who conceived of this were very careful to say this is conceptual only. There is nothing written down that there's going to be a 300-room hotel on one end of it, and a fountain in the center, et cetera. I guess broad strokes of creating a town center that is in line with similar developments that create a downtown zone, if you will, that would have a mix of residential, et cetera. It is projected that this property taxes would pay for whatever the city would be on the hook for or wouldn't. Those are the types of pieces of information I'd need to apprise a respondent of prior to having any confidence that, oh yes, they do want this, without telling them that here's the cost.
Thank you.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
Let's just work one more time around the table, and that'll probably take us to 7.
Okay.
The accomplishment tonight is to give you more guidance to the questions and have a firm categories. Would that be what you're looking for tonight? And then you're gonna develop this, and then we're gonna see it again?
Oh, I will not start interviewing until I get authorization to
No, but
proceed.
I'm just trying to
Mhm.
synopsize. We will get that back, and we will have another discussion as to what the final product is gonna look like, correct?
Yes.
If I could just quickly, I don't have much, I think you guys did a great job of asking the questions, and it was a great presentation. I just want to echo my sentiments that this started basically because of the town center project. And that, to me, is the main focus, that, at least my perspective is, that's the main focus. The Central Park thing, I've never really been in favor of, I don't know what a Central Park is to begin with here, because it's still going to be a civic center site. So I don't know what that means. You know, to me, we got a park that nobody uses right now here, so. But I do think your bullet points here underneath the concept are pretty good, I think. You know, to kind of separate a lot of the ideas. So I thought you did a good job of doing that. But I don't know what the Central Park is, so I don't know how to comment on that. You did a survey for us in 2013, 14, 15, somewhere back, I think.
10 or 11.
10 or 11?
Done a survey for the library and the school district. so-
You did a survey for us once before while I was on this council.
On the library?
It was everything.
2011.
11? And it was excellent.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that's the reason why you're probably back. And in that survey, you did ask the citizens their priorities. And I thought that was a good idea. Because surprisingly, Trails and Pathways were came out to be number one. And I would suspect that they may come out to be number one again, or right up there close. So I thought that was an excellent thing to do, and I was just thinking maybe that might be something to include.
I am always happy to cut and paste out of a 2011 questionnaire, rather than developing the question from
That
scratch.
was my next point I was going to make to you. You might want to take a look at that and at least get some, no sense reinventing the wheel.
Of course, we get a discount for that, right?
Very big. No.
At least he's honest.
And just briefly, I am always in favor of deferring to experts. So I think you know how many to ask and all of that technical stuff. So I support deferring to you.
Thank you.
The library, I think, right now would be number 2 on my list of priorities in this, because the millage renewal is going to come up within a couple of years. There's been a lot of talk about opening on Friday. I'm not in favor of taking money from the general fund to do that, never have been. Our bond experts tell us not to do that. But I think the climate has changed. And one of the reasons that it failed before is because of outside stuff. I think if you asked the same question today, it would be different. But on the same hand, I think we need to ask a question: would you be in favor of a 7-day library with a millage increase? And I also support what Councilman Hamilton said regarding a separate entity for the library, because I was in support of, I'm just speaking for myself, but I was in support of that when that was presented, and I think that failed because of extenuating circumstances also. But to me, I think that's the way it should be. And I just think Trails and Pathways should be discussed somewhere in the survey. It was number 1 on the priority list last time, and I firmly believe that we should pay attention to what our citizens say, and if they think trails and pathways are a high priority, I think we ought to pay more attention to it. Mayor Pro Tem Baker.
Thank you. The priorities, I think, would give us some of the funding priorities as well. Obviously, I was thinking that would help with that, so that kind of solves some of that earlier stuff. My other question that I thought of after the fact was, that I agree, defer to your expertise on all of that. I don't want to get involved in trying to pick a sample size and everything. But the Aquatic Center takes an active role in this list, and we haven't really talked much about the Aquatic Center as a council. I don't know if that's coming from city staff. I know there's issues that potentially need to be addressed, but it kind of surprised me a little bit to hear that that was on there because that's not something we focused on at all. We focused on it a little bit as part of the town center concept. So putting a hotel and moving and all of that stuff. You look back at the stuff. I mean, that was part of the issue. So I'm just not sure if that's how that plays in or why that plays in, and if it's a must, if something needs to get reorganized a little bit. And then with respect to the town center, how do you define the town center concept? Because I think that there's people that will, I mean, and that's just the word used here.
I guess
There's actually a definition, and I can find a definition of what a town center is.
Okay, but is that how we want to, that makes it sound like we've already decided we're doing a town center.
No, but it would be general description of what a town center is. Because there's different types of town centers. There's pure residential town centers. So there is a general accepted terminology that we can use that would not be, it wouldn't say it's, it would be so general, I don't think it would affect the outcome.
Okay.
Because I think, personally, one of my findings is that people don't know what a town center is.
Sure. And then just last point, I think to the Central Park issue, I think the question's more a Central Park component of the Civic Center property zone. I don't know how you specify that, but the idea, I mean, a lot of people loved the idea of having a lake and having a trail around it and some artwork or something, and that's more of a focus of a Central Park. But obviously the whole campus has got, I mean, you don't have, there's a police station's not in the middle of other Central Parks, right?
Right.
So I mean, and I think there is a component of,
It's not a bad thing, though.
well, it's a safer park.
Very safe.
Yeah, but I think that
the
makes.
bullet points, I think.
They lay it out pretty well.
I think the bullet points are pretty good, personally.
Yeah.
But I get it.
But yeah, I'm just trying to
I get it.
find a happy, because I think that those three choices have always been, I mean, we've talked a lot about those, and obviously they need to be fleshed out a little bit, but there's the 2004 study that, if Brian Waddles is watching, I'm sure he's yelling at us about, but that had more of a Central Park feel to it, because it used city resources to build up a park-like setting throughout the campus. So I don't know, I don't want to just dump that idea altogether. I think that's a component that some
I just
people
think
are curious about.
I think it's really, the points that are in these bullet points talk about those kind of options. At least I thought they did.
Yeah. Okay. These are such familiar concepts to us. Trying to translate those to people who may not be as dialed in as we are. That was my question about town center, right? We all know what that is, but making sure the community understands what we're talking about. And they might not, mixed uses in town center, are they going to grasp that means what that means? And so just want to make sure that, one, I'm telling the expert again, that the data actually is legitimate data and makes sense, right? And people aren't just picking a number and giving an answer because they think they know what it means. I want them to actually give an educated answer. So that comes from us. And publicizing the fact that this survey is coming, I think, is important for us to do, so people know, hey, if you see this caller ID number, call, please take this, it's important. This is your way to have a voice in the community and tell us what's going on. And I would hope that the local newspapers would help with that as well.
Yeah, 11 o'clock news are right on top of things.
Next week.
Councilwoman Abraham, did you have
I did.
a couple follow-ups?
Couple follow-ups. So we talked.
About 5 minutes.
All right, I'll try to be quick. All right, so Mr. Kavanaugh, you mentioned the demographics you expect for the residential survey, like 30% would be parents of young children, thereabouts.
guess.
How do you chart the demographics for the business community? Do you have any data that says, well, we want to hit X number of businesses that have 1,000 or more employees, or 100 to?
I don't have a really good handle on what ought to be. I can tell you that the larger the business, the less likely we are to get a hold of someone who is in a position to answer those questions. As I said, we have done work with Cranes Detroit Business but they provided us with a subscriber list, and we were able to take a look at that subscriber list with the limited amount of information on the electronic file, more or less stratified based on that. I do have some data that was forwarded, if I am not mistaken, that quite frankly, most of my focus has been on the residential survey, so I haven't given a great deal of attention to that. I certainly have colleagues at work who might be able to give you a much better answer than that, but my general notion is I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the proper stratification based on number of employees, gross annual income, any other number of any other demographics that might be the case.
And then I wanted to come back just for a minute to the telecommunications tower, since that was, thinking back to the conversation 2 weeks ago, there was a lot of conversation around, well, could we use a public park to improve the telecommunications experience for certain portions of the city if there were a benefit, such as, putting up the lights in the park and you attach the towers to that. I agree that it's probably lower on the list of topics, but I do think that might still be something that we want to touch on if we're not getting into a 20-minute survey by any means. Because I think the answer could be quite different of, do you want to, how do you feel about a cell phone tower, in the middle of the park? Well, I think we all know what the answer to that is going to be. But if there's maybe, I know you wouldn't ask it like that, but if there were some public benefit that, I'll say mask the maybe downside to having a tower on public land, that I truly would like to understand, because those that do live on the west side, I get to hear about it at work when people's conference calls at night get dropped because they have poor cell phone reception. Maybe they'd be willing to use public property if there was a benefit as well to the park.
Doesn't the city get $20,000 a tower for the 2 towers it owns?
That's
Yeah.
not much of a.
It was very low,
benefit.
very low.
Very little. Okay, thanks. Let's go this way. Okay.
So, I see the Big Beaver shuttle only on the business survey, but we've had questions, and I know Councilman Baker has brought it up countless times, about whether it's a benefit that the people are willing to pay for. So I think that would be a good conversation to have with residents as well as business. And then just to expand on the Central Park. Central Park is kind of I don't know, for lack of better terminology, but the one option is to do absolutely nothing, which is easy to do, it's no cost, or to do something which would be trails, pathways, park benches, artwork, whatever that is, a fountain that people can come, gather, walk, sit, reflect, as Councilman Pennington does periodically on the park bench. And then certainly something that's more of a private, public combination on this property that would benefit and be more of a downtown situation. So maybe Central Park is not necessarily the right terminology, but we have a lot of busted up blacktop parking lots in this nice piece of property. So
Beautiful.
they're wonderful, right?
Councilman Pennington.
Just to reiterate the point that came from this side of the table, we had an election a year and a half ago, and the topic of the election was the town center property. That was how we, got elected, or barely got elected, was on how, because some of the people had the misinformation that the bulldozers were coming, and it was a done deal. that is the reason why we talked about a survey from day one. Right after the election, we talked about the survey, and then there was obviously other problems in the city that I'm sure you read about. But then it's the green space and the library. Those are basically the three topics that are the hot button topics right now. The library, obviously, I mean, we're covering that, but it's the town center property is the reason why we started the survey. The aquatic center, I don't hear complaints. I mean, the aquatic center, people are going to want the aquatic center repaired and an ongoing thing. I mean, that's just something. It's like the golf courses. I mean, you have to throw money at it and keep it operational. It was said, that has not come up recently, and the telecommunications, that's something that's brand new. So if we're going to include that, it would be like a one question or one or none. We had talked about not having it on there. I would concentrate on the issues that are most on people's mind. And like I said, if you go back a year and a half and see the election, that was the issue. But back to my point earlier, I would still rather see, I know, like you said, you're the expert, but I would still rather see a second set of data from respondents that are not they're not going to be called. But they can still, I mean, there's a lot of passionate people that want to be on the survey, and if we can, qualify, I mean, that will hold less weight, obviously, than the lengthy questionnaire. But I would still rather see a secondary component, because that would be cheaper. I mean, a little bit cheaper than the phone interview, the mail out. And I don't know how the group, was thinking about that, but, that would be, just to get more of a, and that would hold less weight than the 500 respondents from the phone survey, but, we could, look at both components.
Sure, the best figure I have is just under 28,000 unique address households in the city. With the nonprofit discount of the city, it would probably be somewhere around 20 cents a piece of postage was printing times 28,000. Or, I mean, we could be selective, but then again, you're getting into the sampling. I'm more than happy to put together the approximate costs of that.
Right. I'm just curious about.
Well, we have a new tool, My Civic App, which we're about to release the beta to City Council. What My Civic App is that people can sign up, and then you can do polls and ask questions. So that might be a way we can do this.
Combine them?
Yeah. Take a look at that.
I still think we better be careful and let the expert be the expert here, because I don't want to see this get skewed where somebody uses the data that's not as important against the data that's really important. I really think we need to, my opinion is, let the expert do the survey. It's just my opinion.
If you were to go down the road of an online or via My City app, it would be very important to have the telephone interview executed prior to that.
Well, maybe we could just get some thoughts or something on it. We can make that decision. Can we just wrap this up?
Yep, I'll be quick. Right, yeah, I'm sure you'll provide us this, but I just want to see like a estimated time the survey will take, given how deep we go into these questions. So we
interview
know
length estimate?
right, like if we truncate out the telecommunications or take out the aquatic center, how much that would save us, and what your expected effect on the how much survey results we'll get. That will give us a good sense of whether we should just take those off or include them or not. And then for city staff, I'd like to get a copy of the old survey from 2011 and for all of council and the public to see.
We did do that maybe before, a couple years ago.
Okay, yeah.
Before you got it, yeah.
So I'd like to see that and have the residents see it. It'd be good to contrast it. That'd be really interesting to see.
It is
how that
interesting.
looks.
Talks about the library.
Yep.
Great stuff. Just my 2 cents too, the aquatic center question could go for me. Telecommunications is way, way, way down there on the bottom of the list for me. To me, it's a very selective survey of people that would live around the park. Because somebody that lives on the east side, do they really care about the park on the west side that may affect the people that live around it? But just my 2 cents, I think those two, we should focus on the priorities. So, Thank you. Did you get enough tonight?
I got plenty, thank you.
See you again tomorrow.
Okay, I don't see anyone here for public comment, so thank you. We are adjourned. See you at 7:30.
Thank you, John.